Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another edition of InfoMate. Today we'll be taking off where we left it last episode, preventative tips and measures you can take to reduce your chance of being diagnosed with cancer. Although there are some things that can't be controlled about cancer, decades of research have clearly shown that by living a healthy life, people can reduce the risk of developing the disease. Some of the risk factors for cancer are alcohol, tobacco use, unhealthy diet, a lack of physical activity, and as always, it's about prevention rather than treatment. Now, some of the guidelines provided by the World Cancer Research Fund we'll be covering today are plant foods, animal foods, eliminating alcohol, and dietary supplements. To help us answer this and other questions, we are joined here today again by Sue Rad, nutritionist, author and speaker, and founding director of the Nutrition and Wellbeing Clinic, and Dr. John Cummins, a specialist consultant physician and the principal and medical director of executive medicine. Thank you again, John and Sue, for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Now we'll be talking about cancer, touching a base from where we left the last episode of cancer. So John, if you don't mind just refreshing our viewers, what exactly is cancer?
Well, cancer basically is the uncontrolled growth of cells. So normally when our cells divide, they have a breaking mechanism so that they can't continue to reproduce. And what happens with cancer is there's one or multiple of triggers, and for example, sunlight, smoking, certain viruses are some examples of the few triggers. And essentially the cell just keeps growing and reproducing, and there's no handbrake, no braking mechanism where it just stops. So what happens is as the little cluster of cells doubles in size over a certain type and keeps doubling, it starts to compress any normal tissue that you've got, so the normal organ can't function anymore, and then it can actually spread through the bloodstream or the lymphatic system to other sites and set up satellite growths as well.
So we call that metastases,
Yes,
don't
that's
we?
metastatic disease. Yeah.
Now, should people be waiting till they develop illnesses or feel sick before going to see the doctor? Is there some sort of early screening process that people can use?
Yeah, look, I think internationally we agree that there are screening programs that are basically useful for some cancers, not all. And the cancers that come to mind in particular would be cancer of the cervix with a pap smear. There are mammography screening programs for breast cancer. There's either a colonoscopy or a stool test for colon cancer, for example. But there are other mechanisms, for example, skin check for the melanoma, which can kill you at any age. And often, as I've said last episode, even just a physical examination, sometimes you'll pick up cancers in people that don't know they've got a problem. Yeah. It's always better to get these things early because you've got the greatest chance of cure and recovery, therefore.
Okay. Now, cancer, the deaths related to cancer and illnesses, it's not. It's more of there's a human issue to it as well, you know. So they've got your family, your family's family, your friends, who are all affected by if you're diagnosed with cancer.
Absolutely.
And it's often one of the most feared diagnoses, that people in the community have. And the ripple effect is huge, not only financial, but in terms of losing a loved one as well. Wow. And I think people also need to realise that a lot of cancers actually carry genetic risk. So, for example, if one of your parents or your sister or one of your children, God forbid, have a colon cancer, there's a genetic risk. Melanoma is a genetic risk. Breast cancer, there's a genetic risk. So it's important to know your family history to see, well, if my risk is high, what can I do about that, and speak to your health professional about that.
Some of the things we're going to be talking about today, including our plant foods. So now, would this help reduce the risk of even genetic cancers?
I think so. Because what the research shows that if you are more prone to something genetically, you have what they call a polymorphism, which is just a slight little change in the sequence of your genes, that the diet and your lifestyle is even more important. And it can reduce risk. So some studies have shown, for example, if you have a certain genetic change to do with a particular enzyme in your liver that predicts that you're going to be more likely to have cancer, as say 50% of the population do, but you eat something like broccoli or from that family of vegetables 3 times a week, just 3 times a week, that negates that risk. So food and diet can be very powerful and is especially important when you already have a risk variant over and above someone who doesn't carry a risk.
And actually, if I could interject, Dean Ornish published a recognised study in the early 80s showing reversal of heart disease, plumbing problems, blocked arteries with diet and lifestyle. And he subsequently published, in the last, I think, 5 years, a very small study of men with prostate cancer. So what they did was they ate essentially a vegan diet. They exercised an hour a day. They did meditation and group therapy. He showed a reduction in the prostate cancer size without any other intervention. He showed a lowering the blood test, the PSA. But really importantly, when they biopsied the prostate cancer tissue, the cancer-promoting genes have been switched off through diet and lifestyle, and that is fascinating. So there's some early evidence that even with the cancer, lifestyle makes a difference.
Yeah, they're looking at this whole field. It tends to be called nutrigenomics, and it's about how your food and the nutrients and the phytonutrients from your food talk to your genes and control the expression of your genes. Yes. Switching genes on or turning them off, silencing them.
Is this a long-term process, or does this happen straight away after a meal?
After a meal, you will upregulate or downregulate genes. You will have an impact, which is why what you eat all the time is important, because you're having an opportunity at least 3 times a day to intervene in a positive way.
And the Dean Ornish study wasn't that long. It was, that was, I don't remember, but it may have been a few weeks or a couple of months or so.
I had the pleasure of meeting Dean Ornish some years ago in San Francisco, where he practices, and he's recognised as the father of lifestyle medicine. And he now says, based on all the research he's done and everyone else, that lifestyle changes, dietary and lifestyle changes, are the behavioural equivalent of having life-saving surgery. And that these changes work more quickly and they're more effective than we ever thought, and that they can work just as well, if not better, as the more high-tech medical approaches, surgery, gadgets, this kind of thing. It's just that they're underutilised. People don't know that they're so powerful, and you have to make some change, which can be difficult to do until you learn how.
But I would like to say that for the audience, because we don't know their circumstances, if they do have a cancer or they have symptoms, they really should be working with their health professional,
of course,
and not abandoning a professional advice alone and taking on. I mean, we believe in this, but we can't speak to every individual circumstance.
And I think what we're saying is we believe in the best of everything that orthodox medicine has to offer, the best of it, but using medication judiciously and using natural things as much as possible to prevent getting sick in the first place.
Which is evidence-based.
Yeah, so all this natural stuff we've got in front of us, a great spread of fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
Now, how does this tie in with your diet?
So one of the big areas that the World Cancer Research Fund focuses on in terms of a guideline is it tells us to eat mostly a plant-based diet.
Okay.
Mostly. That means your plate should mostly be covered with plant foods. So you can't just eat a plate of broccoli or cauliflower or whatever. So therefore you need protein and legumes like different types of dal, split peas, chickpeas, black beans. Different countries have different legumes. Are powerful because you can get a lot of protein from them. You get the best sort of fibre and the best carbohydrate from legumes. So they fill you up, you get all your micronutrients. You don't have to worry about missing out on meat because you get your zinc, you get your iron. Yep. They've got it all. Plus they lower chronic disease risk. So all the plant foods, fruit, veg, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds, are very powerful.
Are there any vegetables in particular that I think you've spoken before about 3 groups of plant foods?
There are actually for cancer now. Well, let me just mention 2 in particular that they've got their eye on, that they've been doing research for some time. I'll mention the first one, and this is the family of vegetables we call brassica or cruciferous vegetables. Okay. Now, what's in that family?
Yeah, what are they?
They're all the ones that often kids don't like, or even some adults don't like. They're the smelly, sulphur
so your broccolis or your cabbages?
Broccoli, cabbage, Brussels sprout, collie, kale, but even things like rocket and watercress, wasabi, that's all part of that cruciferous family. Now these are strongly anti-cancer because, and this is where it gets really interesting how these things are. Inside these vegetables you've got phytonutrients called glucosinolates, and you've got this enzyme in there that lives in the cell called a myrosinase enzyme. Now, on their own, they're ineffective, but when you cut that vegetable, you chew it or you juice it and you take it in, that enzyme can get to that glucosinolate and convert it into a potent anti-cancer phytonutrient. And that whole group is called isothiocyanates, and one of them that they've studied the most is sulforaphane, and that is found, well, it comes from eating broccoli.
Okay.
But of course, if you cook that for long periods of time, you will kill off that enzyme, you'll destroy the enzyme, so that conversion can't take place. You see what I mean?
So you should be eating it raw,
You should be
or
having a lot more fresh food than cooked food, but you still can have some cooked. But if you're going to cook, what they've shown, they've compared microwaving, boiling and steaming of the cruciferous vegetables, and they've shown the best thing is if you're going to cook, to steam for about 3 minutes, no more than 5 minutes. Boiling even for a minute, or microwaving even for a minute, kills off most of that myrosinase.
Okay.
So you should just lightly steam if you're going to cook. Now, if sometimes you might just want to have something mushy, you just might really like a pasta with some mushy broccoli or something.
Okay.
If at the same meal you eat another cruciferous vegetable, like a rocket salad or something, you're introducing that enzyme again because it's not dead.
Yep.
So in chewing it together, that enzyme can convert that starting material and form that strong, potent anti-cancer substance that basically upregulates your own liver detox mechanisms, your natural body mechanism. So that's just amazing.
What was the other group?
Well, the other group, I'll just briefly mention it, is of course the whole onion, garlic, shallot family. And, you know, research on the Asian population, for example, they eat a lot of onions and things. We've known for years that it's associated with low rates of cancer. There are other compounds similar to the ones I've mentioned in the brassica family in the onion that are also formed when you cut and you release an enzyme. So there are starting materials in the plant foods, and by preparing them properly, we get the full wallop of benefit.
Now, should I be aiming to, say, have a cup of vegetables with my dinner, or maybe a couple of pieces of fruit a day? What sort of portions, rather than just your plates?
Yeah.
Should people
That's
be...
a good question, isn't it? Well, we always say the more the better.
Yep.
Government guidelines in Australia, for example, are two fruits a day and 5 serves of vegetables. But from a cancer point of view, the research shows that really even more than that is better. So I would say at least make your snacks your fruits. So if you're going to have snacks, 2 or 3 snacks, make them a piece of fruit each time, a different type of fruit. That way you cover that. And vegetables or salads, remembering you want some fresh, some raw, you should have it every lunch and every dinner. Because if you just wait till dinner time, you miss out an opportunity. You can't get there. There's only so much you can fit in your plate and in your stomach.
Now, sidelining slightly, for a breakfast meal, how should we incorporate some of these things?
Okay. Well, it depends what your ethnic background is, of course, but some people, these days it's become quite fashionable to make green smoothies. So you could actually pulverise kale and other green things and put just a little bit of fruit like banana for a touch of sweetness. So you're not juicing where you're throwing it out. You're blending it and you drink everything, and that would be a way of getting some of that in. In some cultures, for example, when I was in India for breakfast, I had a masala dosa, as one does in southern India, and of course you always get lentils. So you can get lentils into your breakfast that way. So we need to learn from other cultures and other experiences as to how they use these foods. The cultures that use them the most know best how to use them.
What about yogurt and fruit then? A lot of people in our culture would have that.
So in a Western culture, you could have nice big bowl of fruit salad and, you know, a dollop of some sort of low-fat yogurt. That way you're minimising that saturated fat. That could be another way to get some fruit in.
So on a similar topic now, you hear drinking green teas high in antioxidants is good for you. Is it really, or?
Well, they have done studies, and studies show if you do drink green tea or oolong tea, which is a semi-fermented one, you do absorb the antioxidants because it's a plant, comes from a plant food. And it does help with what's called oxidative stress in the body. It mops up those harmful free radicals. It is helpful. It does have caffeine though. So that is a consideration for some people. So you should be aware that green tea still has caffeine. So if caffeine's an issue, you could have other herbal teas, blackcurrant, lemon and ginger, rosehip. They are all so loaded with these phytonutrients, but without the caffeine.
Now I also noticed that we've got some meat on the other side of this table here. Now that brings us to animal foods. Now, honestly, I just have a piece of steak every now and again. Never thought it would be bad for me, but
No.
enlighten me, please.
Well, you know, you can eat get red meat that's lean now so you can get rid of the fat, and we know that affects your cholesterol and so on, so that can help.
Okay.
But from a cancer point of view, they think it's a lot more than just the fat. It could be that it carries too much of a readily form of iron that's absorbed into the body, and we know iron can act as a pro-oxidant, promote oxidation reactions in the body, because we know, for example, that people that take iron supplements or have high red meat diets have much higher rates of bowel cancer.
Wow.
The one area that I'm particularly fascinated about at the moment is how eating a lot of animal protein foods changes our gut flora. Our gut flora.
What
So
does
that's
that mean? The flora of your...
so it's the bugs.
You've got, every human being carries more than 2 billion bacteria. So you've got more bacteria on your body than there are people in the world. But in fact, it's actually important that you do, because those bacteria keep you healthy. And it's thought that about 50% of the dry weight, so if you take a person's bowel motion and you get rid of the water, probably half of it's bacteria.
Dead bacteria at
So
that
the
stage.
bacteria that live in your bowel actually are really important in keeping you healthy. They help you absorb vitamin B12, a whole lot of other things. And there's a notion now that if you, through diet or through antibiotics, have unhealthy bacteria in your gut, that predisposes you to a whole variety of illnesses which have been, it's not proven, but muted to be as diverse as autism, to rheumatoid arthritis, to autoimmune diseases.
Inflammatory bowel disease.
To a whole lot of different things. So this is an emerging aspect of science at the moment. So,
And really the whole gut flora, they're sort of thinking of it now as a bit of an extra immune system.
yes.
It's like
yes.
part of your immune system, but it's not really part of you. It's inside you, but it's not really inside of you. Do you know what I mean? And so the thing that they're looking at is when you eat protein like meat, we've always assumed you just digest all the protein, but we now know that about 10% of the protein escapes digestion by your human enzyme.
Okay.
And so then that amount reaches your colon every day. And what happens to it? Well, we know that the gut flora there ferment it. And then they produce all these substances. They call them metabolites. That's just a big fancy word for saying substances form from a starting material. And these metabolites have all been tested in different ways. There's ammonia, there's sulfides, there's nitrosamines and nitrosamines. There's a whole bunch of them. Each of them independently, in one way or another, are either promoting cancer, initiating cancer. So the picture is not looking good. Whereas when you eat indigestible carbohydrates from legumes or from whole grains, you promote the growth of different type of bacteria species. And also these bacteria, the way you keep them alive is by feeding more of those good carbs, and then the substances they produce are different to the substances produced from meat. The substances that are made are things like short-chain fatty acids that John can tell you all about. Butyrate is one of them, and we know that is strongly anti-cancer. So it's not all as simple as it looks to the eye. There are multiple steps, but the end result is that eating diets that are rich in animal products like meats, especially red meat, and not to mention processed meat, is very, very harmful, can promote cancer. Eating diets rich in plant foods is strongly, strongly protective against cancer starting up in the first place.
Now, you touched on bowel movements. Should a person be having healthy? What's a healthy bowel movement? What's considered unhealthy?
Oh, look, I think as much as possible and as large a volume as possible. And if you were able to pull it apart, you'd probably find mostly non-digestible plant food in your bowel movement. So, I think one of the theories is that if you, for example, have this piece of salami and it's got a toxic product in it, if you don't, as it passes through your gut and it hits your colon, if it doesn't move through very quickly, the toxic product inside the salami is sitting next to the gut wall, promoting cancer.
More contact time.
So I think of these legumes as almost like a broom, and as it travels through your guts, it's sweeping away all the toxins on its way out of your system, basically. So it's almost like sweeping a street if you have these sort of things.
And just to add to that, there's some interesting research being done here in Australia at the CSIRO in Adelaide. And they've shown that for people, or at least in the animal studies they've done, with red meat, for example, if at the same time they give the animals what's called resistant starch, which you get from polenta or mealy meal or from a green banana from plant foods, it reduces the formation of some of those toxic compounds. It doesn't totally block everything, so you still get some bad things. But if you're going to eat your meat, when you do, you should always have beans with your meat or an indigestible carbohydrate. They will strongly protect you from some of the ill effects of the red meat, but not all.
Yes, not all of them. Now, the last one that I'd like to touch on is the dietary supplements as well. You know, if you're not getting, we talked about garlic earlier on, you know, people are taking the garlic capsules or the fish oil capsule, magnesium capsules. That's listed as one of these recommendations to stop doing these things. Now, how does that work?
We could both talk about
We
it.
could. Let me start off. Well, the World Cancer Research Fund, again, as I mentioned, has looked at all the evidence. And on the whole, there is more evidence showing potential harm of supplements than good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Whereas the evidence for those same nutrients taken in the food as a whole is extremely positive, is extremely encouraging. So when you get those nutrients in the food, there's something about the food, that matrix of the food, things working together, a bit like an orchestra, that's very protective. When you isolate the nutrient out, put it in a pill, and there's only so many of those you can fit in a pill anyway, you are starting to take in something that's more like a drug. It's not going to behave the same way, and we have evidence to show that now. In fact, some of the antioxidant supplements that often people take in the hope of preventing cancer are now being linked with higher rates of cancer.
And one example was beta carotene. Now that's the protective antioxidant in carrots that smokers who took beta carotene had a higher risk of lung cancer than those smokers that did not take beta carotene.
And since that time, many of the supplement manufacturers, of course, have pulled out the beta carotene from their formulation. But from time to time, John, I don't know about you, I still find it in some of them. And how is the consumer, how is the public to know?
No idea.
So the safest way is to avoid supplements unless there is a good indication for them, and your doctor or a good dietitian will tell you if there is. So in some cases, we will put you on a supplement for a period, and we will monitor your blood test results, and then we'll take you off it if not required. But you should not have to be on supplements. You can easily meet all your requirements if you get well informed, and if you base your diet on real food, on whole food and unrefined food, and mostly plants.
So any nutritional deficiencies can be counteracted by simply eating the right types of foods to begin with?
Yeah, unless you've got a disease, for example, you can't absorb foods from, like malabsorption.
Yes.
But really it's about, look, this isn't actually hard. This is actually really, really simple to do. You just eat a lot of vegetables, you eat a lot of fruit, and you start using your beans and lentils and things, start to learn if you're not in a culture that does it, and minimise or avoid red meat in particular. It's not that hard to do. And I think we have a lot of people that will take supplements, but why don't they get the basics right first? Because most people aren't getting the basics right, which isn't that hard.
Absolutely, and Dr. Dean Ornish, who we mentioned earlier, I always remember his quote. He says, "Why is it such a radical idea, such a crazy idea to ask people, to tell people to eat more of a plant-based diet, and yet it's not radical to tell them to take medication for the rest of their life or to go for open heart surgery?"
Wow, that is astounding, isn't it? People would rather go for the operation. They think, that's the best way. That's the best approach to it.
Yeah.
But rather, you can prevent most of the risk of those occurrences by simply eating.
And even then, if you do have the operation, as John will tell you, when you have a bypass, that doesn't mean you're fixed for the rest of your life. It has a shelf life in, I believe, 6 to 8 years. If you don't change the way you eat.
It depends, but the issue is that you've had the bypass fixed, but don't forget you've probably got the same plaque in the arteries going to the brain for a stroke,
That's right.
in your big aorta that can balloon out and blow on you and you're dead.
So you've only fixed a little bit.
You've only fixed a corner, like it could be rust in the pipes. You fix the rust in the hot water pipe in that corner of the house. But the rust is probably in the pipes
everywhere.
in all the
That's
house.
right. And plus, this rust will come back.
Yep.
So unless you really attack the underlying cause, and it's all to do with how we live, what we eat, how much we move, what we drink and what we don't drink, and we've got a lot more control in our hands and within our choices than we realise.
This is really powerful stuff.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, that brings us to the end of a couple of comprehensive episodes on cancer. I mean, we've covered a lot of information out there for the viewers. We listed in our previous episode that we were talking about regular physical activity, controlling your weight, what was the high-calorie food and drinks to avoid them.
The sugary ones and the refined starches.
And then basically the message we want to try and get across to our viewers is a diet high in plant foods.
Yes.
And limiting, if not eliminating, the consumption of red meat.
Yes, yes, yeah.
That would be consistent with all the best scientific
Yes.
evidence at this point
So,
in
so
time.
if, for example, someone, just if I could just ask one
course.
very quick thing to Sue, someone didn't want to stop eating any meat, they didn't want to be vegetarian, what should they eat? So they can eat red meat less than 500 grams a week?
So the World Cancer Research Fund says no more than 500 grams per week, but they say you should prefer legumes, and if you're going to eat any flesh kind of foods,
Any flesh, yeah.
fish is better
Yes.
and chicken is better.
Yes.
So you could still, for those patients of mine that just have to have the red meat, I will say, well, have it once a week.
Yes.
That way you are minimising your
Yes.
risk. Make sure you have 3 or 4 main meals focused on the legumes. So
Yep.
it could be a curry, could be an eggplant or okra curry with dal or something or other.
Yep.
And
And
if,
fish and
if they
chicken.
want to eat fish, they can have fish
Yep.
for the remaining time and,
Yeah.
a bit of
Or
chicken.
Yeah,
Okay.
good.
That's great. Thanks very much for joining us, guys. I've appreciated it. We've had a pleasure talking to you and learning all this information that, personally, even from me, I've learned so much that I'd like to go out and apply to my own life.
Yes, yeah.
Thanks very
Pleased
much.
You'll
to
only
hear
be
that.
healthier. You're healthy now, but you want to maintain that for the next 40 years.
That's
now.
right. And most
Yeah.
people, when they're young, they look healthy and they look good from the outside. It's a matter of staying well from the inside
Yeah.
and
So it's all
having
about thinking
quality
about the
of
long
life.
term, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Cancer is an everyday issue that up 30% of the population has to deal with. But as you can see, from following some of the simple and effective lifestyle tips that we've covered, you can reduce the risk of these problems occurring in the first place. Things like controlling your weight, the correct diet, abstaining from harmful products such as processed meats, high calorie, high sugar foods, and eliminating alcohol, conducting regular physical activity. These are the paving stones to achieve exceptional health and longevity for any individual. For more information, you can visit Sue's website at www.suerad.com, where you can find a myriad of free resources such as healthy recipes, food and nutrition information, and you can sign up for her monthly health newsletter that will keep you eating well and leading a healthy lifestyle. For a thorough preventative health check and to prevent any chronic illnesses and for medical evidence-based newsletters, you can call John's team at Executive Medicine. For more information, go to www.executivemedicine.com.au. We look forward to bringing you another program from MTA International Australia Studios. Thanks very much for watching. Jazakallah and Assalamu alaikum.